Wind moves across the Indian Territory. Before the West had legends, before it had myths, it had a man history tried to erase. His name was Bass Reeves, and he was born a slave. 838, Arkansas. Bass Reeves entered the world in chains. Property, not a person. He was owned by a man named George Reeves and later taken to Texas. When the Civil War erupted, his master joined the Confederacy, and Bass went with him, not as a soldier, as property. But war changes everything. Somewhere in the chaos of battle, something happened. Accounts differ. Some say they argued over a card game. Others say it was a violent confrontation. What we know is this. Bass Reeves struck his master and ran. Imagine it. A black man alone in Confederate territory, hunted not just as a fugitive, but as stolen property. If caught, the punishment would not be mercy. It would be death. He fled into the Indian Territory, a lawless expanse that would later become Oklahoma. And that is where the slave disappeared, and the legend began. For years, Bass lived among the Creek and Seminole nations. He learned their languages. He mastered tracking. He became an expert marksman. He memorized the land, every river bend, every ridge, every shadow. By the time the Civil War ended, the man who had once been hunted had become something far more dangerous. He knew how to disappear. Freedom officially came in 1865, but Bass Reeves had already taken his. He returned to Arkansas not as a slave, but as a free man with skills no ordinary lawman possessed. And the West was about to need someone exactly like him, because the Indian Territory had become the most violent place in America. Outlaws fled there. Murderers hid there. No one wanted to police it. No one, except one federal judge. And in 1875, the judge would make a decision that changed the West forever. He would send a former slave into the most dangerous territory in the country, with a badge. The judge's name was Isaac C. Parker. They called him the hanging judge. In 1875, Parker took control of the federal court in Fort Smith, Arkansas. His jurisdiction covered more than 75,000 square miles of Indian Territory, a vast, violent land where killers vanished and warrants meant nothing. He needed deputies who could survive it, men who knew the territory, men who could track ghosts. So he appointed a former slave. Bass Reeves became a U.S. deputy marshal, one of the first black lawmen west of the Mississippi. There was no backup, no telegraph lines in the wilderness, no reinforcements riding over the hill. When Bass received a warrant, he rode alone, sometimes hundreds of miles, into territory controlled by fugitives, who knew the land as well as he did. Sometimes better, he carried multiple pistols, he carried a rifle, and he carried something far more dangerous, patience. His first missions were simple in writing, and lethal in reality. Find the outlaw, bring him back alive. Dead was permitted. Alive was preferred, because in Fort Smith justice ended with a rope. Bass developed a method. He studied the warrant carefully. Family ties, known associates, past movements. He didn't rush. He waited. Sometimes he posed as a traveler, sometimes as a ranch hand, sometimes as a fugitive himself. He let criminals feel safe. Then he closed the distance. One early pursuit lasted weeks. The fugitive thought he had crossed into safe ground, hidden among allies who would never betray him. But Bass had learned the languages of the land. He listened, he watched, he tracked hoofprints days old. He read broken branches like written confession. And when he finally stepped out of the brush, his revolver was already drawn. The outlaw surrendered without firing a shot. It would not always be that clean. Word began to spread. There was a marshal in the territory who did not miss, who did not bluff, who did not abandon a warrant. Outlaws started whispering his name around campfires. Some refused to believe it. A black deputy marshal riding alone into outlaw country? It sounded like a rumor, until men started disappearing, one by one. By the late 1870s, Bass Reeves had already made dozens of arrests. He transported prisoners chained in pairs, sometimes 3 or 4 at a time, across miles of open land. If they tried to run, he shot to stop. If they surrendered, he treated them with strict fairness. He never drank. He never gambled, he never accepted bribes, and he never let personal hatred interfere with the law. In a territory ruled by chaos, Bass Reeves became inevitability. But inevitability creates enemies, and soon one mission would test not just his aim, but his loyalty to the badge itself. By the 1880s, the Indian Territory had learned something. If a warrant had your name on it, Bass Reeves was already riding. He did not chase loudly. He did not boast. He arrived. One winter, Reeves was assigned a warrant for two notorious outlaws, hiding deep inside hostile territory. They were heavily armed, paranoid, quick to shoot. A direct approach would have meant death. So Bass did something else. He became one of them. He put on tattered clothes, carried a bundle over his shoulder, smeared dirt across his face. Then he walked straight into their camp at night. He told them he was a fugitive too, on the run from the law. He spoke calmly, shared their fire, listened. They believed him. They even bragged about the crimes listed on the very warrant folded inside his coat. When they finally fell asleep, Bass moved first. In one swift motion, he drew his pistols and covered them both before their eyes were fully open. They woke up staring at inevitability. He marched them over miles of frozen ground back to Fort Smith, alive. But not every arrest ended peacefully. Over the course of his career, Bass Reeves would shoot and kill 14 men. Every case ruled self-defense. Gunfights in narrow cabins, ambushes behind trees, shots fired from across riverbanks. He was never wounded by gunfire. Not once. Some said he was lucky. Others said he was protected by something beyond luck. The truth was colder. He practiced constantly. He drew both pistols with either hand. He could reload on horseback. He remained calm when others panicked, and calm wins gunfights. By the time most deputies retired, Bass Reeves was just getting started. Warrants piled higher. His record grew staggering. Hundreds of arrests, then thousands. He crossed rivers in flood season, tracked fugitives through snow, rode alone into territories where even pursuers refused to go. Outlaws began abandoning camps at the rumor of his approach. Some surrendered without resistance. Some tried to ambush him. None escaped forever. By the 1890s, his arrest count had climbed into the thousands. Over 3,000 fugitives brought in. The territory was slowly changing. Railroads expanded. Settlements grew. The wild edges began to shrink, and with them, the need for men like Bass Reeves. But one warrant would arrive that no disguise could soften, no distance could numb, and no amount of legend could shield him from. Because this time, the name on the paper was his own blood. The warrant arrived like any other. Folded paper, federal seal, a name written in ink. Benjamin Reeves, his son. Benjamin Reeves had been accused of murdering his wife. There was no confusion, no mistaken identity. The charge was clear. Most men in Bass Reeves' position would have stepped aside, requested another deputy, let someone else carry that burden. Bass did not. He accepted the warrant. He rode out alone. There are no dramatic recorded speeches, no documented final words between father and son. What we know is this. Bass Reeves tracked Benjamin down. He arrested him without violence. He delivered him to Fort Smith. Benjamin was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Years later, records show he was paroled for good behavior. History does not record bitterness between them, only duty fulfilled. By the end of his career, Bass Reeves had served more than 30 years as a deputy U.S. Marshal. His documented arrest count exceeded 3,000. 14 men killed in the line of duty, all ruled self-defense. He could not read or write, yet he memorized every warrant read to him. He never lost a prisoner. When Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, the federal court system in Indian Territory was dissolved. At nearly 70 years old, Bass Reeves continued working, this time as a city police officer in Muskogee. He served for 2 more years. Then he retired. Bass Reeves died in 1910. For decades, his story faded into the margins of American history. Then historians began revisiting the records, the timing, the white hat, the reputation for fairness, the lone lawman riding into dangerous territory with an unshakable moral code. Some believe he inspired the creation of the Lone Ranger. There is no definitive proof, only parallels. What is documented is stronger than legend. A man born enslaved who became one of the most effective lawmen in the American West. Not myth, not folklore, recorded fact. The West was wild. Justice was rare. But when a warrant carried your name, Bass Reeves was coming.